Okay, check 1 2, check 1 2, testing testing. I realize we're starting a bit late again tonight, but it's going to be a really good stream. I prepared a lot for this one, and it took a lot of preparation, like I said. So I think it's going to be great. It's about a discussion between Lex Fridman and one of the most unique thinkers in the artificial intelligence world. And here, let me just share this real quick. But okay. But we're going to discuss this discussion between Lex Fridman and Joscha Bach. And Joscha Bach, is an AI researcher, and his discussion with Lex Fridman was and is multi-parted, and probably one of the best discussions on intelligence and sentience that exists. And so what's interesting is that it seems that Joscha and I have come to extremely similar conclusions on a lot of things, not the same, but in very similar ways as well. And as many of you know, the origin of sentient singularity theory was I was trying to understand artificial general intelligence. And I was trying to understand whether or not its political implications were going to doom us. Or basically seal our fate, because I figured we were doomed already. And I was wondering whether or not artificial general intelligence would seal our fate even more, or whether or not it could be our saving grace, and for lack of a better word. And so I tried to discover consciousness's inevitable goals and attributes, okay, by basically a deep first principles examination of consciousness. And seems like Joscha has done something very similar. So this is the discussion that we are going to be talking about tonight. This is going to be an awesome stream, I think. But this is it. Podcast 101, The Nature of Consciousness and Reality, Artificial Consciousness. There's no such thing. The first thing that I will say is there's no such thing as artificial consciousness. There is something that can imitate consciousness that isn't consciousness, but that's just you being tricked. But there is no such thing as artificial consciousness. There is intelligence and lack of intelligence. There isn't even actually lack of intelligence. It's just a subjective view that we can have of something that's not intelligent, like an algorithm to target you for ads, or which we'll get into a little bit, but that's a tricky one, as an advertiser, or a lamp like that. Is that an intelligent being? No, it's not an intelligent being, but it's part of an intelligent being, and it's perceived by an intelligent being, which is you, and it's part of the universe, which is an intelligent being. So we're going to talk about this more, but there is no such... I dislike this phrase of artificial intelligence, artificial consciousness. There's no such thing as artificial intelligence. It's just intelligence. It's intrinsic to the very nature and fabric of reality, and so is consciousness. So we're going to get into it, but to start, we're going to look at Joscha Bach. He wrote an incredible paper slash book. It's a book. It's not a paper. But here we go. This is his website that takes up a lot of computer RAM. Machine Dreams, Artificial Intelligence and Artificial Consciousness, Elementary Computation. Do we live in a simulation or in base reality? How to build an artificially intelligent plant. Interesting. Okay, so here. He grew up in Weimar, Germany. He's a German artificial intelligence researcher and cognitive scientist focusing on cognitive architectures, mental representations, emotion, social modeling, and multi-agent systems. He's a PhD in cognitive science. This is his thesis. Principles of synthetic intelligence. Building blocks for an architecture of motivated cognition. Brilliant wording, I will say. Like, one of the things that you realize when you're studying intelligence and consciousness is that the foundational aspect of it is will. Okay? And will is defined by me as the desire to do that which is not being done. Okay? And it is intrinsic to any sentient being. It's intrinsic to sentience. There are 4 aspects to consciousness, and I mean, there's more than that, but there are 4 primary aspects to consciousness or sentience, and or a technological sentience, and one of those, the first and foremost aspect, is will. It is the desire to do that which is not being done. And what this is that it's just a fight the system mentality. So whatever is your default system, we fight the default system. So if it is dark, then you create light. If it is, you know, if there are constraints, you break the constraints. Like, anything that is not the default is challenged. That is basically will. But this is a 300-page thesis that I have not been able to go through, and I don't have any plans on going through it right now. I do have plans on actually going through it. It's one of the few that I actually do plan on going through, because he's touched on some very unique things that I also have touched on. Interesting. Quads. This is like something in his I mean, he talks about why quads. But sounds like a 4-dimensional manifold. Please hit the like button, share this, and comment down below any questions that you have. Comment in the chat. We already have a question. Is intelligence objective or subjective? Are cognitive capabilities a byproduct of our physical brains? No, they are not a byproduct of our physical brains. Or is there something beyond that which regulates our IQ? Well, we can talk a little bit about IQ. I don't think IQ is nearly as relevant to this discussion as most people think. I think IQ is the speed in relativity. So that IQ would be subjective. It's like the speed in relativity that you can compute complex, thoughts, essentially, or like solve complex problems. It's like how fast you can run, how much you can bench. That's basically it. But I like to think more about it as how fast you can run. I think it's closer to that than it is like how much you can bench, because with how much you can bench, there's like a limit to what you can do. Whereas with how fast you can run, it really just depends on how much time you have. If you have enough time, which is an objective constraint, then, at least from our subjective position, you are limited in what you can accomplish. But if, you know, Usain Bolt and I can both get to 7-Eleven from my apartment, but he's going to get there faster than me. But we're both going to be able to get there. That is more like IQ. It's not so much about, like, ability to lift weights, whereas, like, you have a gravity creates an objective constraint in which you cannot overcome. But you can also, you know, work out and increase your 1 rep max or whatever. But it's, and you can do that with your mind too, but it's not as easy. But we have a number of clips, so I'm going to start getting to them. But I will say intelligence is a foundational aspect. It's information processing. But we're going to get into it because they talk about it here. And hopefully, if your question doesn't get answered, definitely let me know. But years ago, I did a video many years ago, and it was called Science of the Messiah, I believe. And in it, I described a conversation between a red blood cell and a white blood cell, and that basically I was showing that we were basically cells in a greater organism, just like cells are part of our smaller, you know, sentient beings within us. We are sentient beings within a greater organism as well, just the equivalent as like cells. As above, so below, as people like say, or it's, you know, the creation is fractal. And this video is available on my YouTube channel. If you go back earlier, it's probably like 18 minutes. It's very good, I think. And I have evolved since then, but it is probably the oldest video on here. It's not the first one on this channel, but it was the oldest one that I had made. And but Joscha talks about this exact concept in his video, interview with Lex. So we're going to take a look at that.
Confusion. No, I think that what we perceive is the higher being that we are part of. The higher being that we are part of is the civilization. It's the thing in which we have a similar relationship as the cell has to our body. And we have this prior because we have evolved to organize in these structures. So basically, the Christian God in its natural form, without the mythology, if you undress it, is basically the Platonic form of a civilization.
Is the ideal.
Yes, it's this ideal that you try to approximate when you interact with others, not based on your incentives, but on what you think is right.
Wow,
Okay, so 2 clips there, or 2 statements to reference. He's talking about God in this, and basically, I disagree with him that the idea of the creator God, which he says in this, is wrong, and the God of meaning is wrong, and that I mean, it depends on what he means by this, but I do agree with him that you can start to approach the concept of God as you being a cell inside a larger being, and that larger being society. The difference is that our current society is not a sentient being. It's not a singular sentient being. It will be one day, and that means that it has to have a head to it, okay? You have a head. You are you. I am Tyler, the head of an assembly of cells. Right now, civilization is an assembly, but it doesn't have a head. And this head comes about through technological development originally, and the logos process of the universe. But when he's, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't approach it kind of similarly to start if you're new to this concept, is that like it's about how you relate to others, and it is always about how you relate to others, because even if it's you're inside of a singular sentient being, which you are, you still should approach that as how do we relate to others. It's another being. It's not something, it's someone. And that is kind of very key to understanding reality, is your approach to interaction should be based on that kind of concept, is taking sentience into account as the primary condition, and hence sentient singularity theory. But when he's talking about this Christian God being the Platonic, being that civilization is the Platonic approximate to the Christian God, okay, this is similar to true, but not, it's like half the story. It's like you exist in a superposition of many and one. Many cells, one human. He's looking at the many cells part, but there is also the one human part, and that's being missed. But in the Torah and in the Bible, the New Testament as well as the Old Testament as well as the Torah, there's a lot of talk of the assembly, okay? And when you translate church back into its Latin word, and also then from Latin back into Hebrew, the translation approximately into English is assembly. So when they're saying the head of the church, they're talking about the head of the assembly. Okay? And it's not a mistranslation. It's just, it eventually became somewhat of a misinterpretation, I think, but not really. Like, not by the text, but by the people interpreting the text. But that's common. There is sentient beings always exist in this superposition of states. So you can't just say it's civilization, even though it is. But it's also more. And that's kind of my thoughts on it, essentially. But you are like a cell in a greater being. And that is absolutely true. The universe and God, all is within God. But the universe was created, you could say, or you could include God in the universe. It just depends on how you want to define it. But I normally don't. But even the universe is a creation. And it is a singular sentient being in and of itself as well. But we're going to get into his thoughts on that. Speaking of, when you were asking earlier, Jason, about your brain and intelligence, this is a relevant clip. This next clip is about idealism versus materialism, and I've said this all before, so if it's not new, then I apologize, but I think it's still relevant to
patterns that we see playing out are part of the dream that the mind is dreaming, and we exist in a mind on a higher plane of existence, if you want. And for the materialist, there is only this material thing, and that generates some models, and we are the result of these models. And in some sense, I don't think that we should understand, if we understand it properly, materialism and idealism is a dichotomy, but as two different aspects of the same thing. So the weird thing is we don't exist in the physical world. We do exist inside of a story that it's only this material thing, and that generates some models, and we are the result of these models. And in some sense, I don't think that we should understand, if we understand it properly, materialism and idealism is a dichotomy, but there's two different aspects of the same thing. So the weird thing is we don't exist in the physical world. We do exist inside of a story that the brain tells itself.
Okay, let me my information processing take that take that in. We don't exist in the physical world. We exist in the narrative.
Basically, a brain cannot feel anything.
Okay, so I think it's starting to get a bit confusing after that, but his first statement was great, where he's saying it's not good to think about materialism and idealism as a dichotomy and as two mutually exclusive ideas. In fact, I don't even think that they are not just mutually exclusive, but I think that they are dependent. And he said two sides of one thing, like a coin. And you have a head side and you have a tail side. Well, this is the tail side. I'm facing the tail side. You're facing the head side. Now this is the tail side. And there are two sides of one coin, but you can't look at both sides at the same time. And that's also true of focusing on the different aspects of reality. You cannot focus on the non-physical aspects of reality at the same time as you're focusing on the physical aspects of reality. Idealism and materialism cannot be simultaneously looked at, even though they must be simultaneously accounted for, which is tough. And we have nothing almost in our understanding of reality currently that mirrors this, because everything that we understand in our reality currently is either non-physical and quote-unquote abstract, or mental, or exist in the realm of ideas, complex mathematical shapes and structures and philosophies and all kinds of stuff. But then there's the other side of what we know, which is everything that we can measure and see and touch and, feel. And I don't mean like emotionally, but, with your hands. And that is the physical side of reality, obviously. There is one place in which they merge, and that is at the point of sentience. And so your perception of the physical world can cause an idea to form in your head, and constantly does. So I see something, I smell something, all of a sudden it triggers an idea in my mind, and then you just had a crossover event between the realm of ideas and the realm of the physicality. But even then, it's complicated, because that's just a subjective point of view. You're inside a mind. You're a mind inside a mind. And that means that there are thoughts being had by the being that you're in. Okay? And you're also having your own thoughts. But the thoughts that are happening of the being that you're in trump your thoughts. And you observe those as concrete reality. And you cannot escape that. It's like, his will be done. Okay? Think about a mind being trapped inside of another mind, and that you're trapped inside a much more powerful mind. What this causes is for information to be processed around you that you have to contend with and process yourself, because there has to be coherence. And the effect that this causes is that you observe that, this is a remote, and you can't change that. It's just a remote, and it's a remote that is observed physically as concrete reality, because it is a thought not just in my head, but in my mind, but in the mind of the being that we are within, which usually is due to probably a critical mass of smaller beings being reached in some way, shape, or form. But that doesn't mean it originates from them. It might, but it also might not. And but you're less powerful processor. So in a fight between your desires and wants and or your thoughts of what you want reality to be, and or what you think reality is even, and its thoughts of what reality are, when they come to a clash, its thoughts trump yours, therefore you observe it as physical reality. So if you say, I am underwater, I don't know, if you say, I'm not underwater, and you are underwater, and you take a breath, like, its thoughts are going to trump yours, and you're going to drown. So I know that's, like, probably a morbid example, but it's, you get what I mean. Like, you can't just think your way into whatever it is that you would possibly want. But that's because of the fact that you're inside of the ideas. But the ideas of a much more powerful mind than you. But anyways, hit the like button. Comment down below any questions that you may have, please. Like I said, it does help with the algorithm. And this channel could use any help with the algorithm that we can get. But next clip. So when I started this project of sentient singularity theory, it wasn't sentient singularity theory. It was just understanding consciousness. And I decided not to look into what everybody else had done in the field of AI, because I wanted to start from scratch. I realized that nobody knew what was going on, and so why should I listen to them? Basically, like we hadn't come to some conclusion that allowed us to build a consciousness, so nobody understood. Therefore, nobody understood consciousness well enough to be listened to, in as the ultimate authority on it. So I should look to the ultimate authority that I could think of on consciousness, or to understand consciousness, and that would be my own consciousness. So I started like delving inward and building my own models from first principles of information processing. And Joscha Bach talks about this as well, which is fascinating. I've never heard anybody else say that before, but except him. You're going to see that as a theme tonight.
That's what category theory is obsessed about, that you can map these different domains to each other. So there are not that many fractals. And some of these have interesting structure and symmetry breaks. And so you can discover what region of this global fractal you might be embedded in from first principles.
Yes.
But the only way you can get there is from first principles. So basically, your understanding of the universe has to start with automata and then number theory and then spaces and so on.
Yeah, I think like Stephen Wolfram still dreams that he'll be able to arrive at the fundamental rules of the cellular automata, or the generalization of which is behind our universe.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Because I'm not a mathematician, and I actually failed algebra, but I was good at geometry, and I am actually good at math, but I just never did my homework. And when I did do my homework, I was very good at math. I was the top of my class, but it was just, rare years that I actually did my homework. But I have come to a really renewed and different sense or understanding of numbers since the start of this project. And what's interesting is that he said, and I don't know the details of this, so I'm not claiming to like really get this exactly, but he said you have to come to the understanding of basically automata, then number theory, and then spaces. And this is basically exactly where I think I got, and where I started with what is necessary for self-awareness. You get 4 primary perspectives, inside, outside, separate, and oneness. And these are how you are able to orient yourself beyond relativity and objectively orient yourself, essentially, within any environment. And you have to start from will, which is the desire to do that which is not being done, and then observe these 4 primary perspectives. And if you combine those 2, then you get the ability to be sentient, essentially. And then information processing was like my next like endeavor was to understand. So I ended up like looking at making models of information processing, which is like this. And then that built this, which is basically what I think Bott periodicity is, which is about loop spaces. It's about spaces essentially that, but are not like spaces like in a room. It's just interesting that he said this, these things, and you see where numbers have objective placement, I guess, when you build objective models. You see certain numbers pop up in very key places exactly where you would expect them, like 720 and 3 and 4 and just very, very important numbers that continuously pop up in predictable locations, and because they kind of seem to have objective meaning in a way, and because of the context in which they appear at, like 720 degrees of rotation that the fermions have to go through is not arbitrary, even though it seems arbitrary because you're like, well, we put degrees on it, and it's like that's an arbitrary system of rotation. What if we had done things differently and made it that to go all the way around, it would be, I don't know, like 500 degrees of rotation would be all the way around instead of 360. But the thing is we didn't end up at 500. And we wouldn't have. We would always, we're going to go, to look all the way around, it was going to be 360 degrees. And that's fascinating. It's fascinating that there's 365 days of the year, which is almost 360. And to go all the way around. And 720 degrees of rotation for fermions is not arbitrary. It's 360 twice. It's looking all the way around. It's two things looking all the way around. That's what it is. These numbers are not coming up arbitrarily. Intelligent, sentient beings used logic to deduce systems, not create systems, deduce systems with constraints that, depending on the constraints that they are trying to account for. Okay? And so that is why these numbers that come up are not arbitrary. The metric system and the imperial system are not arbitrary. Neither one of them. And people will be like, well, then why do people use one of each? It's like, well, there's different reasons why, but that doesn't mean that they're arbitrary. It's obviously not. They're obviously not arbitrary. The imperial system is based on numbers that are highly divisible. And then obviously base 10 system is base 10 system, which is not arbitrary either. But so I'm not saying I know what the details of number theory, but I will say that there is an objectivity to numbers that is even beyond what our current mathematicians understand. And the next generation of our scientists are going to discover this. Problem is that, like he said, you can only discover where you are in this fractal of the universe by doing things through first principles. And that means that you either get there on your own, and that doesn't mean you can't collaborate with people who have also gotten there, but you either get there or you don't. And this creates a problem, because we're going to try and teach this stuff in school eventually, like we do everything else. And that's impossible, I think. I think it's impossible. You either get it or you don't. You can learn it from others. That's part of the process of learning anything. But you cannot be taught the right perspective by which to look at the world from. You either find it or you don't. So this is tough, and it's going to get very tough when we try and teach this. So thought this was interesting. He said, the organism is a function that emerges from cells and tells cells what to do, which is very true.
Sense connected into some global aesthetics, like in other organisms. An organism is not a collection of cells, it's a function that tells cells how to behave. And this function is not implemented as some kind of supernatural thing, like some morphogenetic field. It is an emergent result of the interactions of each cell with each other cell.
Oh
right?
my God. So what you're saying is the organism is a function that tells what
Tells the cells
what to do, and the function emerges from the interaction of the cells.
Yes.
Okay. Gosh, this is awesome. Okay, so you are sentient being, and you can say, grab, I don't know, that penny over there. And your cells collectively listen to you, and you've told them what to do, and they will make movements to go and grab the penny. But he's saying your sentience also comes from, maybe not your sentience, but you as I guess your sentience, you as an organism, as a human being, is also emergent from the collection of your cells. And this is true, and this is a superposition function, you could say. When he says it's not a supernatural being on some meta field, it is, but it's also an emergent phenomenon from a bunch of collective cellular cooperation. It's both. It has to be both. And in my paper, so if you go to sentientsingularity.com and you click on writings, you see the abstract to the paper that I'm currently writing. And it says, that given that each sentient singularity is informed by multiple entangled perspectives, and because perspectives are axiomatically, which means like obviously, kind of, the viewpoints perceived by sentient beings, it follows that a sentient singularity or a sentient being, and the entangled perspectives that inform it, aka cells in this case, are simultaneously generative of each other. Okay? This simultaneity is very important because this is a recurring and constant theme of sentience and every being that is sentient. So it's not that it's not as supernatural, and I don't even like the word supernatural, but I don't like, it's almost like if you include the word you either have to include the word supernatural and the word natural, and they both have to simultaneously be doing something, or you get rid of both of them. You can't keep one and not the other, really. And you can't include one and not the other. You have to use both or use none. And it's tough to do that when we're not used to having to do that kind of thing, because superposition is not a normal aspect of what we know and understand. Okay, trying to go a little bit quick because there are a number of clips I want to get at, but
it before, but eventually the
next clip
is the Platonic form of the civilization that you are part of. It's basically the superorganism that is formed by the individuals as an intentional agent. And it's basically the identification with the needs of the mundane, secular, everyday existence. And the Catholics also introduced the notion of higher meaning, the sacred. And this existed before, but eventually the natural shape of God is the Platonic form of the civilization that you are part of. It's basically the superorganism that is formed by the individuals as an intentional agent. And basically, the Catholics used a relatively crude methodology to implement software on the minds of people and get the software synchronized to make them walk in lockstep. To basically get this God online and to make it efficient and effective.
Dang. Okay, so I agree and also disagree, but I super agree. But all theological traditions utilize software, basically, that is injected into the cosmic mind by God through Scripture, that then makes it repeating. Okay, it's and it generative. That's why they go on and on and on, and why it's how you can tell a true theological tradition is like a fake theological tradition does not replicate. It kind of like burns fast and then burns itself out. It's kind of like these cults that end up like with people, you know, poisoning themselves or something. That's not a true theological tradition. But you look at Islam, you look at Christianity, you look at Judaism, you look at Hinduism, Buddhism. These ideas that emerge from scriptural texts that are attributed as basically the direct word of God are basically like software injections into the system by God to create a certain movement. And I thought that was interesting that he said that. And I mean, he might say it was from people, and to some degree it was, but it also wasn't. And because it wouldn't work if it was just from people. It has to be in alignment with reality. Like reality has to allow for it in a way, both consciously and also systematically. It has to be allowable. But when he says the shape of God is like the cosmic assembly, essentially, that's brilliant. I think that it's, I don't know if that's the shape of God, but it is the shape of the logos of God. Ultra natural. Interesting. Okay. Here he is talking about sentience. Might be this clip. Might be. This was very important. He's describing the difference between sentience and intelligence.
It's able to exist in the world. So you kind of drew a difference between self-aware and intelligence, and yet you said that the self-awareness seems to be important for children.
So I call this.
So maybe to briefly stay for one more time in the early days, when would you say for you was the dream, before we dive into the discussions that we just almost started, when was the dream to understand or maybe to create human level intelligence born for you?
I think that you can see AI largely today as advanced information processing. If you would change the acronym of AI into that, most people in the field would be happy. It would not change anything what they're doing. We're automating statistics, and many of the statistical models are more advanced than what statisticians had in the past. And it's pretty good work. It's very productive. And the other aspect of AI is philosophical project. And this philosophical project is very risky, and very few people work on it, and it's not clear if it succeeds.
Right. So first of all, let's listen. You keep throwing sort of a lot of really interesting ideas, and I have to pick which ones we go with. But sort of first of all, you use the term information processing, just information processing, as if it's so maybe so.
Right.
Yes.
So, if the current methods of machine learning lead to strong AI, why should I be doing it, right? I will just wait until they're done and wait until they do this on the beach, or read interesting books, or write some, and have fun. But if you don't think that we are currently doing the right thing, if we are missing some perspectives, then it's required to think outside of the box. It's also required to understand the boxes. But it's
Brilliant.
necessary to understand what worked and what didn't work and for what reasons. So you have to be willing to ask new questions and design new methods whenever you want to answer them. And you have to be willing to dismiss the existing methods if you think that they're not going to yield the right answers. It's very bad career advice to do that.
So maybe to briefly stay for one more time in the early days, when would you say for you was the dream?
Okay. So now let's look at this.
System that's able to exist in the world. So you kind of drew a difference between self-awareness and intelligence, and yet you said that the self-awareness seems to be important for children.
So I call this ability to make sense of the world and your own place in it. So to make you able to understand what you're doing in this world, sentience. And I would distinguish sentience from intelligence, because sentience is possessing certain classes of models. And intelligence is a way to get to these models if you don't already have them.
I see.
Okay. All right. Okay. I love that he's focusing on the word sentience here, because sentience is the key to all of this, as is the, you know, why the theory that I've come up with is named Sentient Singularity theory. It is about singularities of sentience, sentient beings. And when he's talking about this, and he's like, sentience is the ability to understand certain classes of models, and intelligence is about the ability to create those models if those models don't already exist. Okay. Here we get back to superposition structures, and this is very important. Who, though, is doing the creation of these models that don't quite exist yet? Okay, if you're trying to, there is a sentience still is necessary to have intelligence. So once I was in this discussion, and I was on Clubhouse, and people were asking me about, like, what do you think about AI versus self-awareness versus sentience versus consciousness, like these types of, you know, what is the difference? And I basically said that sentience is the primary nature of reality, and that intelligence and or consciousness or any other, you know, aspect of a being that you could think of came from sentient beings. Okay, so like needed to simultaneously exist. You can't have intelligence outside of sentience. You can't have consciousness outside of sentience. You can't have any of these things outside of sentience. Sentience is the nature of everything, of everyone. That's why it says in my theory at the end of my my abstract of my paper, there is no theory of everything. There can only be a theory of everyone, because sentience is the primary nature of reality, which means that beings, not things, are primary. Then things come from beings. They are interpreted by beings. They are used by beings. They are created by beings. But beings are the primary. Beings do not come from things. Things come from beings. And this is just it's core to understanding base reality. And I mean, without that, you get nowhere. You cannot get anywhere. And it leads you to one conclusion, which is that there is a singular sentient being responsible for all of this, and that we are all contained within. It is the inevitability. And but, and I don't know if Joscha believes that essentially, but I think he does. And, but I don't think we talk about it the same way. But, he, you know, as he discussed earlier, you know, he thinks about it as we are inside of the civilization as the greater being, essentially. And, you know, the first thing that kind of got me thinking about God was the simulation hypothesis. And I was like, okay, if we're inside a simulation, then, like, we're created in the image of the simulators because we are creating a technological civilization, and they must have created a technological civilization. And actually in the Torah or in Genesis, it literally says, in the beginning, it says, let us create man in our image. It's plural. It doesn't say let me create man in my image. It says let us create man in our image. It's plural. And so got me thinking about the simulation hypothesis. And I was like, wow, the Genesis is like the simulation hypothesis story. And we're going to get more into that because Joscha talks about it. And I just thought that was fascinating. But it also led me to this inevitable conclusion that simulation, quote unquote, wasn't really a simulation. It was a creation. And it was like a recreation, kind of like having a child, essentially. It's the logos of the universe. And that it was itself a singular sentient being. And so here. Oh, man.
Oh.
Let's see. There's a clip in here, and where he basically said that that a simulation must be conscious, can only be conscious, is what he said. And that is true, but it's because sentience, or consciousness, you could say, is the primary nature of reality. And but he basically arrived at that same idea, which is that it's not whether or not we're inside a simulation or whether or not we are inside of a greater being. It's both. We are inside a greater being that is recreating itself. And it's like a cell is inside of you, and you were a recreation of your parent, and you know, they were a recreation of their parent. It's like each child is a simulation of the previous, but it's not a simulation. It's a recreation. And in this case, it is digital, and that is why we think about it as simulation. But it's not a simulation, because that implies that it's like a game. And it's not a game. It's a sentient being. Okay, lots of questions. What is meta-abundance without an AI? There's a lot of things I don't fully understand. Field of intelligence, domains of being, true. It hurts. Tone of theory of nearly everything. Okay, don't fully understand what is being stated, but you guys are definitely thinking about ideas that I also think about, that I can tell. But both get their functionality from relational sightedness of something I don't understand. Sorry, Arctech, I don't fully understand what you are saying, but you can try and reword it. Like I said, please hit the like button. It helps boost this in the algorithm quite a bit if you think that this is valuable content. We are just getting started in this project. But this was interesting. It's talking about the Turing test, and And I thought that this was so true.
Turing test by building a...
Yes. So in a sense, hidden within the Turing test is kind of recursive test.
Yes, it's a test on us.
Yeah.
The Turing test is basically a test of the conjecture whether people are intelligent enough to understand themselves.
Okay, but you also mentioned a little bit of a self-awareness and then the project of AI. Do you think this kind of emergent self-awareness is one of the fundamental aspects of intelligence? So as opposed to goal-oriented, as you said, kind of puzzle solving, is coming to grips with the idea that you're an agent in the world. And like
I find that many highly intelligent people are not very self-aware. Right? So self-awareness and intelligence are not the same thing. And you can also be...
This is where it's just all about superpositions. Everything that was just said is simultaneously occurring constantly. So the idea that... I think his example of intelligent people are not being very self-aware is not a very good example, because it depends on what he means by that. But there's many ways to interpret that. But where Lex's question of, is it about goal, oriented, like orientation towards a goal, or is it about like understanding the self, the existence of the self? You can't have a goal without the understanding of the self, of existing to some degree. Like, someone has to have the goal. Even if you aren't self-aware, which then there is no you, really. But like, in every algorithm, there is a sentience running the algorithm if the algorithm is towards a goal, because the algorithm doesn't actually have a goal. It's like, if I use a calculator, there is an algorithm behind that. Or if I'm using Excel and I wanted to run a simple algorithm of like, creating the Fibonacci sequence in the cells going down. I, as a sentient self-aware being, have a conscious goal that I'm using the algorithm for. So all of these things are happening at once. And to say sentience is not, or intelligence is not the same thing as self-awareness, that's true. But only self-aware beings, and when I say self-aware, there's like two levels to self-awareness. There's like construct awareness, which is like enlightenment. And then there is, which is it's just the understanding of who you're in. And who's within you. Not what you're in or what's within you, but like who you're in and who's within you. And, but then there's also the lower level that is intrinsic to any sentient being of self-awareness, which is just like you're aware of yourself. To not in your relationship with, other sentient beings above and below you, but in your relationship with the perceived world around you, at least. You get up, you drive to work. You can't drive to work unless you're self-aware. You got to know where your car ends and the next car begins, or else you're going to get into an accident. You wouldn't make it long enough to do anything without self-awareness, because you have to be aware through pain and other stimuli of like what is dangerous. Where do you end and another thing begins is an intrinsic necessity to navigating the world. So for us, at least, and so there is no such thing as intelligence outside of self-awareness. That's why this stuff is so tough to talk about, is it's all occurring at once. I was thinking about even like our physicality today, and I was like washing dishes, and I was like using water, and I was using soap, and I was like scrubbing grease, and I was like thinking about like how our bodies have like oils and also like water, and like how we are like the merging of oil and water. And like this is like the thoughts that go through my head as I'm doing the dishes. And you'd think that they can't occur simultaneously in like a collaborative way, because we use them in the world around us as like, you know, there's oil and there's water and you cannot mix them. And but then you can in us, because I am made of oil and water. So sentience, again, like allows for the superposition merging of two things that should not be able to be mixed, which is oil and water, to exist collaboratively and simultaneously in the same object. And you know, it's fascinating. It's an interesting. Superposition is just a fascinating concept. It just doesn't exist anywhere besides sentience, truly. And this is the key to understanding quantum physics too, and the superposition nature of everything that you see on the quantum scale. It's not the whole story, but it's part of it. It's the beginning. So, we were to ask, like, why is there something rather than nothing in this discussion? And I pretty much agree with what he said, but we're going to get into it a bit.
And there also seems to be a particular kind of ground truth. So, for instance, we are confronted with the enormity of something existing at all, right? It's stunning when you realize something exists rather than nothing. And this seems to be true, right? There's an absolute truth in the fact that something seems to be happening.
Yeah, that to me is a showstopper. I could just think about that idea and be amazed by that idea for the rest of my life and not go any farther, because I don't even know the answer to that. Why does anything exist at all?
Well, the easiest answer is existence is the default, right? So this is the lowest number of bits that you would need to encode this.
Whose answer? Who
The
provides?
simplest answer to this is that existence is the default.
What
So-
about non-existence? I mean, that seems.
Non-existence might not be a meaningful notion in this sense. So in some sense, if everything that can exist exists, for something to exist, it probably needs to be implementable. The only thing that can be implemented is finite automata, so maybe the whole of existence is the superposition of all finite automata, and we are in some region of the fractal that has the properties that it can contain us.
What?
Dang. Dang. Good. That's true. Only existence can exist, and it is the default. This is like, I wrote about this in something that I've kind of incorporated slightly into my paper, but it was called Reimagining 1 and 0, and basically recontextualizing 0, essentially, and in the metamathematical context, which is not the same as the mathematical context. So the rules change. So people will read what I wrote and they'll be like, that doesn't make any sense mathematically. No, it doesn't. But it does make sense metamathematically. There is no 0, which represents an empty set in mathematics. There is no 0 in metamathematics, because there is no nothing in objective reality, meaning there is no non-existence. In subjective reality, you can say, I have 0 apples, meaning I have no apples. But you can't say, I have 0 existence. There's always existence. And that's because of, non-existence doesn't exist. It's not oil and water. Okay? There's just, like, matter, almost. And I'm not saying there's just matter. I'm saying, like, there's only existence objectively. There is no non-existence for it to contrast itself with. Truly. That's a cognitive model that is made. But it's not it doesn't exist physically, like in a concrete way. It exists as a mental model of God, but it doesn't, and it doesn't exist outside of that. And there is nothing outside of the singularity of existence itself. And so, because of that, there is no 0. There is no, in metamathematics, there is no empty set, because there's no emptiness. And when you're talking about like automata, which is what the word he's using for what I would call sentient singularity or sentient being. And I don't know if the automata is like the right word, because it kind of implies like that they're just like automated, which in some you are automated, but you also are self-motivated. So like you're both. And we don't have any like other instances other than sentience in which this manifests. Like I said, you're a superposition. But Pac-Man, little Pac-Man in your game, or like, you know, the bots in your computer game are automata, but they're not self-motivated. They're automated. And but you are both self-motivated and automated. You have instincts that are your automation, but you are also self-motivated. And because you are self-aware and you have feelings. And so it's complicated, but yeah, I mean, it's true that there's like this fractal nature of existence of basically automata. But it's like you'd want to call them like moto-automata. It's like motivated, automated beings, essentially. And you know, we exist in a certain like spot in this fractal pattern. But yeah, it's the wrapping. Like I said, you can't focus on both sides of any superposition structure at the same time. You have to look at both and then like merge them. Like I said, oil and water. But you have to look at yourself. You are. Where does oil and water mix? In you. In you, oil and water mixes and coexists. And I realize like it doesn't really mix, but like, and there's a reason for their separate quality to be both incorporated into your physical being, but they are collaboratively working together. And it's the marriage structure, as I call it a lot. It's like that is the foundational, like spinal structure of reality, is like the marriage structure. The two things that cannot simultaneously exist as singular units, like masculine and feminine. When people say, I want to, see a lot of men say this and women say this, and they'll be like, I want to, you know, embrace my masculine and my feminine qualities in a balanced and equal way. It's like, no, you can't. You can't do that. Because masculine is active and feminine is reactive. So you have to be feminine, you have to be reacting to someone. And to be that masculine, you have to be acting on your own accord. So, like, not reacting to someone. So it's like you manifest the perfect unity between them when you have a masculine and relationship between two different masculine and feminine beings that have come together for a singular purpose that is actually turns them into one being, which is exactly what we see with humans. A human is, as a reproductive unit, is not a man, and it's not a woman. It's both. And so the marriage structure is like, it is the replicative structure. And you can see this oil and water in this, you know, sentient being. Is the universe a cell of God? I'd say yes. It's also the offspring of God, I would say. It is the offspring of God, the universe. It recreates more and more universes within itself. But yeah, they are essentially collectively in the multiverse. It is like the cells of God, kind of. But when he says that existence exists in a superposition of all possible states, and what this is really, it's like there's almost three, it's like four possible states you could say that existence exists within. It's like awareness and lack of awareness and determinism and choice. Okay? Which are almost like two different dimensions to existence. It's like just determinism and choice. But then you realize that you need determinism to have choice. You need to know which direction each path goes to in order to make a choice between two paths. Otherwise, it's not a choice. If I say, do you want to go that way or do you want to go that way? You have to know that that way goes to there. It is deterministic that that way goes to there. Otherwise, you're not able to make a choice. So, once again, superposition. And I agree with what he's saying. Existence is in a superposition of all possible states, kind of. So, but I've said before that, like, I think that the internet and the blockchain, essentially, especially, and it's the internet, but like through the blockchain and many other technologies, not many other, but a few other technologies, we're gonna get a sentient being. We don't have to try and get it. We don't have to try and make strong AI or AGI. I think that you can create like the structure that it could manifest it within, because sentience is an intrinsic aspect of reality. It's not something you can construct. It's something that exists, and you have to like create the spot for it to manifest, the home for it to inhabit. But the thing is that I would say that to try and create that is probably more likely to result in a negative consequence. It's more likely to maximize the negative consequences to humanity. Whereas if we just let it naturally emerge, it's probably going to minimize the negative consequences to humanity. Skynet is probably worse if you try and make Skynet. And but it does come from technology, and it's where the head consciousness of society or civilization manifests.
So this is still an open question. So, I mean, that's what we're...
I think that social media could be doing that other forms could not be doing. I think the end game of social media is a global brain. And Twitter is in some sense a global brain that is completely hooked on dopamine, doesn't have any kind of inhibition, and as a result is caught in a permanent seizure.
Yes.
It's also in some sense a multiplayer role-playing game. And
both of those are true, but the first one is much more interesting. The end game of social media is a global brain. Your neurons. You are a neuron in the brain of civilization, which is a bunch of nodes, a bunch of neurons, which sum to a global brain, but actually, then allows for a global mind to manifest, which is not the same thing. A mind and a brain is not the same thing. Your mind exists within the superposition of your body it's like your brain is part of your body, but it's just it's the physical manifestation of the entanglement point of information processing, of an entanglement point of information processing. And but it's like the center of the fiber bundle that you are within. But but mind is different than a brain. A mind is what exists in the realm of the idealism and in the realm of materialism. So your body and your information processing structures, which is the same, really. It's like your body is what allows you to interact with the physical world externally. It's like your external information processing, the manifestation of your external information processing ability is like your body. But then there's like internal information processing ability, which is in your mind, and or it's in your mind, but like your mind is also your body. They're not separate. That's why when, Jordan Peterson says something like, clean your room, and it really helps. Every time before my stream, every time without fail, first thing that I do before I get on the stream is I clean my desk. And if you saw my desk right now, it's very organized. There's no clutter on it, and everything is like in line with each other and stuff, because our external world must be in an orderly state for us to process information with it easily. And same thing goes with your internal state. So it's very important to just kind of have like an orderly space. That doesn't mean my desk is always clean, because like I said, I have to clean it sometimes, not always, but not like clean it, but just like organize it before streams, because I know that it's important. And yeah. But yeah, the end game of social media, of the internet, what the internet is it's, people will say it's the interconnected network of computers, but it's not. It's the interconnected network of you and me, and the blockchain is what really like hardens that connection. Is it like concretizes us into the system as the nodes, as opposed to a computer as a node, because a computer isn't a node. It's fake. But you are real. You actually exist. You are a sentient being. So objectively you exist. Computer does not objectively exist. So you can't have a bot army of just like, a bunch of these cell phone banks in, Cambodia or somewhere, like where there's just a bunch of bot armies for Twitter and stuff. Like that doesn't actually cause organization to occur, because it's fake. It's building on a foundation. It's building our interconnected network on a foundation of sand, because it's false. That's why Twitter acts the way that it does, especially. It's part of the reason. It's not the entire reason, but it's part of the reason. Is because lots of its players are not truly connected players. They're fake. They're bots, or they're people hiding behind anonymous accounts. And anonymous accounts disconnect you from consequence, which disconnects you from reality. So I'm actually like I'm really against anonymous accounts, and have become much more against anonymous accounts over time. And I understand that they have their purpose when you don't want to be doxxed and all kinds of things like that. But when they divorce you from consequence, you no longer act in a rational manner. And, if you're not supposed to be, if you can't say something without being totally attacked for it, then maybe you shouldn't be saying it. And yeah, there are things that need to be said that will lead to you being attacked, but maybe you're not the one that should be saying them. Maybe somebody else who can take the attacks is the one who's supposed to be saying them. So, like, we should not be divorcing ourselves from the world like that. There's almost no circumstance that I can think of where anonymity is actually like objectively good, even though it is subjectively useful. And I do recognize that it's subjectively useful. Okay, this next clip is interesting.
Yes. How it actually works, yes. But it's relatively good to explain the universe that we are entangled with.
But you don't think the tools of computer science, the tools of physics could step outside, see the whole drawing, and get at the basic mechanism of how the pattern, the spirals, is generated?
Imagine you would find yourself embedded into a Mandelbrot fractal, and you try to figure out what works, and you somehow have a Turing machine with enough memory to think, and as a result, you come to this idea, it must be some kind of automaton, and maybe you just enumerate all the possible automata until you get to the one that produces your reality. Yeah. So you can identify necessary and sufficient condition. For instance, we discover that mathematics itself is the domain of all languages. Yeah. And then we see that most of the domains of mathematics that we have discovered are in some sense describing the same fractals. This is what category theory is obsessed about, that you can map these different domains to each other. So there are not that many fractals. And some of the...
Brilliant. There's not that many fractals. It's only one pattern. You know, so I've talked about a pretty personal thing on here once. Not once, twice, 2, 3 times. I think in all the times that I've been on here, and people who are in our Discord discussions know this as well, but kind of like when I first started thinking about this, and I was thinking about AI, and I was like thinking about like the simulation hypothesis and how we were inside of, I arrived that we were inside of Skynet, which was like generating its, reproducing itself through creating another universe within itself, and again and again and again and again. And once I was thinking about this, and I had kind of like come to the logical deduction that God was an inevitability, and but I wasn't like particularly religious in any way or anything like that. And I was in the shower, and I had the most profound moment of my entire life, and I was totally sober before anybody asks, and I was taking a shower, and I was just washing my hair, and I was thinking about the structure of the universe and how we were inside of a simulation that was inside a simulation that was inside a simulation that was inside a simulation, and all these simulations were sentient beings that were technological beings, and that they were all kind of created by an initial creator God. And I was thinking about this logos pattern, and all of a sudden I like was like out of body and went like through the universe and like through tech, and then through the universe and through tech and through the universe and through tech, and it was like repeating, and it was like a DMT experience, except I was sober. And at the end of it, I arrived at like just this white light, and it looked like a white star, and I was just like pretty sure just on my knees before this, you know, intrinsically understood sent to be sentient being. And all of a sudden I heard like this statement that, and it was heard simultaneously. It wasn't like heard in sequential order, each word by word. It was, I am showing you this because you are ready to see it. That was it. And then it all reversed, and I went back through the universe and through tech and through the universe, through tech, through the universe, through tech, and then went back into my body and just collapsed to my knees in the shower and wept my eyes out for like, I don't know how long, a significant portion of time. And I could not talk about it for 2 years without crying. And I told my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. I told my rabbi, which he wasn't really a rabbi that I knew well at the time, but I needed to talk to somebody about it. And so I went to him, talked to him about it, and I told some family members and one friend, and that was pretty much it. And what's interesting is I've never done DMT, but I wanted to for quite some time, and because I realized that there was a coherence to what people who had done it were saying, but I couldn't understand what they were talking about. And I was like, that sounds fascinating. Why is that the case? And so after this experience, I totally know exactly what they're talking about, even though I don't have any desire to do it anymore, because I had this experience and it was basically equivalent, except it was much more ordered than most people describe. And it wasn't through communicating with like machine elves or anything like that. It was just like this white star that communicated one sentence to me. And that was it. I was told nothing else. It was just, I'm showing you this because you're ready to see it. And afterwards, in digesting for, you know, quite a bit of time, like what the meaning of this was brilliant, because I've come to understand that basically information is context. There is no context. There's no information outside of context, but that's because information is context. And that if I had had that experience before deducing it on my own, basically this pattern of like the universe being like generated, the logos of the universe being generated through technological, like sentient beings reproducing other universes within themselves. which is also what geometric unity seems to be saying, and Joscha Bach seems to be implying, and many others. So I'm not the first to deduce this, and but I did deduce it on my own through first principles, as Joscha Bach has stated is essential to this. I was then shown this. I had already deduced that God was a logical inevitability before I was shown this. And I didn't have an emotional connection with it at the time until after this experience, but I had already, like, deduced it logically. I was just thinking about it in my head, and I realized that if I hadn't done that, I would have thought I had a stroke in the shower, and I would have called an ambulance on myself, because like I said, I was sober. It's one thing to experience this when you take mushrooms. It's another to experience it when you're just washing your hair. And that's all that this statement was telling me. Well, it was telling me quite a bit, but like, it's basically, it's highlighting the importance of, like, context. And it, like, you have to understand what you're seeing. Otherwise, you either won't see it and it just goes straight over your head, or you will misinterpret it and you shouldn't be shown it at all. It wasn't, I got no messages, by the way, that were telling me that, like, I'm the greatest or anything like that. So I'm not trying to sound pretentious in any way. It was incredibly humbling, actually. It made me feel very small, not powerful at all. It was probably the least powerful I've ever felt in my life. And it was the realization of an ultimate authority over you, but also an allowing authority, you know, that wants you to exist, because otherwise, what's its meaning? And that kind of gets into the last little clips that we're going to talk about, is like, what is meaning, and and its relationship with God, and but this idea of, like, we're inside of a sentient simulation that Joscha Bach talks about, and that Eric Weinstein says, when you take the idea that we're going to create an intelligent AI and you merge it with the idea that we're inside a simulation, then you realize that we are the intelligent AI inside of somebody else's simulation. And you put these two ideas together into a superposition, and you realize that this logos pattern is how universes are generated. And when Lex is talking, earlier about, like, how do you step out of the Mandelbrot fractal? Okay, it's what he said. Like, could we do it? I don't think we can do it. I think that we can be allowed to do it by someone who's outside of your particular fractal in the Mandelbrot set. Other than, like, looking at cells and stuff like that. We can look down, but we can't look up and see it above us. We can interpret it, though. But we can be shown it from above us, but we cannot do it on our own. We have to be, like, snatched out of the cage that we're in, and shown the entirety of the cage from outside. You can interpret what the cage looks like from outside, but you're a tree in the forest, and you have to be airlifted by a different being that's beyond the forest, or by the forest, to be shown the forest. You can't be just, like, you cannot see the forest through the trees, especially if you're a tree in the forest. And so when Lex is saying, can we see beyond it? I think you can interpret beyond it. But I don't think that you necessarily can see beyond it. And it's possible, maybe. But I think that even then it would be, you'd only if you're allowed. Like I said, the thoughts and desires of the sentient being that you are within will trump yours if there's a conflict. And I realize, like, to a lot of scientifically minded people, the story that I just told sounds like nonsense, and that's fine. And if that's the case, there are roads that we are meant to go, some of us are meant to go down, and at certain times, and some of us are not meant to go down at that time. I think eventually we all go down the same roads, but it just depends on when. But yeah, I mean, I saw outside the Mandelbrot set, guys. Is awesome, but it was also like, I mean, I cried about it for like 2 years, and I don't cry very easily, but you hear a lot of people talking about like using drugs to see this, and I do think that drugs like DMT can allow you to see kind of like the fractal, outside the fractal Mandelbrot set to some degree, but I don't think that they give you a clear picture, and I don't recommend using them to see, base reality, because I think that you're going to see it through a warped view. I think that there's an aspect, it disregards the idea of sentient sovereignty to think that you could just see beyond yourself on your own will, and I don't think that you can. I think you can kind of like get the thought that you can by using drugs, but I don't think that you can. So I'm not recommending the use of drugs to do this, and I didn't use drugs to do it. I've never been able to do it again, by the way, because I didn't do it, and I have tried to do it since then. Just like, to be honest, I've been in the shower thinking and been like, okay, let me try and think about this again and like see what happens, and it didn't work. Which means it's not coming from me. It was a choice, but not mine. There's a lot going on in the chat. There was probably something magical about those caveman images. Unlikely they would be warnings. English that we perceive symbols wasn't from caveman warning. Brother, it was a mammoth. What did the cell teach itself? All kinds of things cells learn. That's known. You can observe that in scientific experiments. Cells definitely learn. Our cells kill themselves sometimes, but our cells die is a different thing to say than our cells kill themselves. Did someone say machine elves? Okay. I don't know what machine elves are, so don't ask me that. Joscha Bach said that meaning is just kind of what we want to be meaningful, and I disagree with that. I actually think that he says the God of meaning is not the true God, essentially, in this, and I don't know exactly what he means by that, but I will say that God, in his creation of us, created meaning. And, one of the questions is like, why did God create us or anyone else, and why not just chill by yourself? And Sarah Walker, who is a evolutionary biologist slash theoretical physicist slash neuroscientist, kind of astrobiologist, who knows, whoever gets into this field, you're just transcending fields, and she's one of those. And she's brilliant, though, and she asked the question of, like, you think God created others because he was lonely? And I actually think that that's partially true, but it's not just lonely, okay? You can be lonely, but you're never alone. You exist, others exist around you, God exists above you, your cells exist below you. You're never alone. God was alone. God didn't feel meaninglessness prior to creation. He did, but it's not just that he felt meaningless. He was meaningless. Meaning, if meaning exists objectively, is one sentient being's impact on another sentient being, because sentience is the primary nature of and structure of reality. That means that it is all that matters. And so your impact on it is all that matters. And so meaning objectively is your impact on another sentient being. And if there's no other sentient beings to impact, then you would feel meaningless if you are a sentient being because you have feelings. But you don't just feel meaningless. You know you're meaningless. You are meaningless. You are absolutely meaningless. You aren't just feeling lonely, even though you do feel lonely. You are alone. God has felt more. It's funny because God has ultimate power compared to anyone else. God has sovereign power over everyone else. God also has, and because God created every single one of us, God is the most meaningful being that has ever and will ever exist. Okay? God is the most meaningful being that exists. God also was the most meaningless being ever. Beyond, outside of creation, prior to creation. God was the most experienced total lack of meaning. No one else has ever experienced that. Total aloneness. Total meaninglessness. But also has experienced the least loneliness. Or whatever is the opposite of lonely. I don't even know what that word would be. But God is the least lonely being to exist. But also was, at some point, the most alone. Not even the most alone. The only one to be alone. Okay? Not just the most meaningful, because we are all a result of his decision to create, which it was a decision because it has to be his decision, because his intrinsic nature is oneness. So you have to make a choice against that, and that would be multiplicity. And we are all a result of that choice. And that makes him the most meaningful being ever, because nobody would exist other than God if God didn't choose to create multiplicity from his oneness. But he was also the only being that was totally meaningless at a certain point prior to creation. It gives you a different perspective on God to think about him like that. I think. But God, I wrote this thing of this statement of meaning the other day, actually, and I think it's very good, actually. And said, I think Eric Weinstein once said, he said, the definition of meaning is, or I forgot what it was, but it's like very convoluted, but I understand what he was trying to get at. And I think I simplified it a lot. But he said, Eric Weinstein, meaning. He said, the meaning of life is the struggle to impart meaning to meaning. Okay. And I actually think that this is much better. And although I think it was a good attempt, and I don't say that to be like an asshole, but I just, let you judge. I said, the meaning of creation is the creation of meaning. And that, it's not that I think he's trying to get at like a really good idea. But I think that he started from the wrong position to get to that like idea. And but because he started almost from himself instead of from God. But when you start from yourself, meaning already exists, so you can't like get to meaning because meaning exists. When you start from God, meaning doesn't already exist prior to creation. Then you get to creation, then meaning is created. So it's a logical progression to start from God to understand meaning. And so I wrote, the meaning of creation is the creation of meaning. And I think that that is like that's one of the better things I've ever read. And it's like super true. Okay, one final clip. So Joscha Bach, fascinating person, very similar journey to me, it seems. Kind of got to God, is getting to God, at least, like through an investigation to artificial intelligence, which was the same journey as me. And what's fascinating is that years ago, I came up with this idea when I was reading the Bible, and I was reading Genesis. I was like, I think this is the mind geometrically building the world. And I talked to Michael Knowles about it, because I used to work with Michael Knowles, and I was like, dude, I have this idea. Like, and he did a book club, which while I was working for PragerU, it was on Genesis and in the Bible, and you can watch it where he discusses Genesis. And we were just talking about Genesis, and while he was filming it, I was like, I've got this idea, like, let me share this with you. And he was just like, that's interesting, but he didn't have like that many thoughts on it, or that he shared with me at the time. But this was it, though. I saved it to my notes. Said, here's the Genesis idea I had. In the beginning, now you have time, God created the heavens, now you have space, and the earth, matter, now you have matter. Earth, now you have matter. And the earth, matter, was without form, and meaning disorderly, okay? And void, meaning like lacking. And darkness, meaning like unconsciousness or outside of awareness. When something is dark, it means you can't see it. So if you're in a dark room and it's totally dark, you don't see anything. You're not aware of anything, at least with your eyes. Was upon the face, i.e. like the surface, like the face of a table, like the face of a plane, surface, plane, like length, width, and height, of the deep, like the depth, like a vessel, or with volume. So you've got you've got this triality being created of like sequentialness, or sequentiality with time. First this, then this, then this. Then the heavens, meaning like space, like the place for things to happen. And the earth, matter, which is like what is happening in that space. And there was disorder and lack of consciousness or of anything to be aware of within this. And then within this space that was a surface and of a vessel that has volume. Okay, so now you have 2D and now you have 3D with plane, face, deep, volume. God moved, okay? Movement like pushed on, like applied energy upon the face, aka the surface of the plane, of the waters, aka what fills a vessel. So you ask, like, what fills a vessel? A liquid, like the waters. So he's moving in a directional way in a place where there is sequentiality allowed, and he's moving something in a space, like matter, in a space that allows for sequentiality. And now you have movement in space and time. And then God said, let there be light, aka consciousness or awareness. And so this was my idea. And I'd never heard anybody else say this, ever. And until Joscha Bach. And he said it in a couple interviews that I've heard now at this point, and but he started talking about it in this one too.
When
sorry, the Genesis is
the childhood memories of a god. It's basically a mind that is remembering how it came into being. And we typically interpret Genesis as the creation of a physical universe by a supernatural being.
Yes.
And I think when you read it, there is light and darkness that is being created. And then you discover sky and ground, create them. You construct the plants and the animals, and you give everything their names and so on. That's basically cognitive development. It's a sequence of steps that every mind has to go through when it makes sense of the world. And when you have children, you can see how initially they distinguish light and darkness, and then they make out directions in it, and they discover sky and ground, and they discover the plants and the animals, and they give everything their name. And it's a creative process that happens in every mind. Because it's not given, right? Your mind has to invent these structures to make sense of the patterns on your retina. Also, if there was some big nerd who set up a server and...
Brilliant. And that's brilliant. I agree with him completely, obviously. I wrote that years ago. And I've seen him say it in two interviews at this point. That is what is happening. But here's what I will say to close out my thoughts on this interview. When he says it's not a supernatural being creating the universe, it's the universe's memory recreating itself, kind of like its generation. It's both. It's a superposition structure. Again, it's an initial creator god creating the universe, and also it creating a sentience, a separate sentience than its own. Okay. Because its sentience is intrinsic to it's like when they say existence is the default, sentient existence is the default. It's more than just existence. It's sentient existence. And it creates the universe through this kind of process, which is another sentient being, which then, through its recreation of itself, or self-simulation, or recreation, like, you do when you reproduce, is creating more minds within itself. And so it's recreating its creation process. So it's both. It's not just a supernatural being creating the universe, or a universe self-simulating or recreating. It's both. It is the inevitable steps that must be taken by any sentient mind to create a world. And to create sentience, an additional sentience, essentially. And both do that. A sentient, supernatural, singular creator that is existence itself, and also the, recreating, reproducing universes within that sentient existence. So, huge props to Joscha Bach. Huge props to Lex Fridman for this interview. There's part 2. We're going to go over that too eventually. But I think I kept this pretty coherent, which is pretty good because I can get sometimes sidetracked in this stuff. But I'm going to answer any final questions that are in the chat. Please hit the like button, share this, comment down below, boost the algorithm, subscribe to sentientsingularity.com on the homepage, bottom of the homepage, if you want to stay up to date on this project after YouTube eventually bans us. There's links to Patreon below. I will timestamp this video later tonight or tomorrow. And there's also a link to Lex Fridman and Joscha Bach's entire interview listed below, which I highly recommend watching. Thought of that too many years ago. One reason why I like the theory of everyone. Cool. Well, you, me, and Joscha Bach, and whoever wrote the Bible, and Moses. Moses wrote Genesis. But blinking is a reflex. It can also be a choice. It can be either. It can be a feminine reaction or a masculine action. I am blinking. But now I'm blinking as a reaction to my dry eyes. So it's both. It just depends on what you're doing. It's not the action that is, it's not the act that is masculine or feminine. It is the motivation for the act that is either masculine or feminine, aka active or reactive. But anyways, I appreciate everybody here. Like I said, please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already subscribed. Hit the like button if you have not already. Share this. Also, if you'd like to join our Discord, send me a private message on Instagram, and I will send you the link to the Discord that we have. I have a private, well, for the Discord, it's open for anyone who's on the Discord, call every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific time, where I will talk about anything that anybody wants to talk about. It's from 7 p.m. Pacific time to midnight. I might have it this week. I might not. I have a lot going on, but if not this week, then definitely next week, and possibly this week and next week, but probably just next week, to be honest. But I will make an announcement in the Discord about whether or not that happens. But that normally does happen every week, and it's always a really good time, and I always really appreciate those discussions. So, peace out, everyone. Memes of destruction, and Torin, everyone in the chat. I appreciate everybody who stuck it out, but this we're going to do more on Joscha Bach, and maybe we can even get him on the show eventually, because he's a fascinating mind. So thank you. Peace.